Hey good folks, I'm Avram here for Tuts Plus, and welcome to the second part of the eye close-up tutorial. In the previous part, we've created the iris shape using a depth map and a color map. In this part, we would concentrate more on the animation of the different elements in our scene. Let's first reset the camera. I rather animate a camera using a null object and not using the camera transform itself. So to do that, I'll create a new null object, Ctrl-Alt-Shift-Y, and we'll rename it to CamNull, and we'll make it a 3D layer. Now just parent the camera to the null by click holding on the pick whip and dragging it to the CamNull, and now the CamNull is in charge of the camera. So if I'll rotate it, you can see the camera rotates and all the 3D layers rotate with it. In 10 seconds, I would like the camera to be around, let's find that nice position. Okay, something of this sort should be fine. And I'll create a keyframe for the position, the X, Y, and Z rotation. And I'll hit U to have just those values visible. And we'll go to the start of our composition. I would like the camera to begin looking from this point, really zooming in here. So let's see, I'll do this manually. So something of this sort should be fine. And I actually like the animation to be more curved. So let's actually move to the front and we can change the curve animation here. Something of this sort. A bit more closer to the surface. And then just pop out. Okay, this is more like it. Let's mark all of these keyframes and hit F9 to make those keyframe easy ease, or right click and keyframe assistant easy ease, which is of the recording area. And now I'll mark these and I'll hit on the graph editor, and by shift clicking and dragging to the right I can make this animation a bit smooth in. We need to do the same for the position, just smooth in, so we can delay on this point a bit longer and then snap out. Maybe that's a bit too rough of a snap. We can make it ease out a bit more. Same goes for the rotations. Ease out a bit. Okay, great. So this is our camera animation. Wonderful. Now, at first, it's not really clear what we're looking at, and that's the point here actually. Approximately at this point, 5 or 6 seconds, we're starting to see something that's similar to a human eye. At this point, I would like the iris to start rotate a bit and the pupil to scale up and down, as if the eye is zooming on different objects in space. Approximately at this point, we'll need to add the sclera as well, but we'll leave that for later. For now, let's focus on the iris animation, and after that we'll move on to the pupil. So let's first move to a custom view so we can see a bit from further in space what's going on here. Now, let's go into the iris layer and we'll move into the 3D transform section. In here, I've got an option to rotate this layer in 3D space. However, at the moment, it's rotating directly from the center, and that doesn't look good because this layer is supposedly a complete sphere and we're only looking at the iris. So its anchor point shouldn't be here, it should be somewhere around here. So here's what we're going to do. We'll set the anchor point to 500 in Z space. So here's the anchor point, and now here's the actual iris. Now we can't see it because it's not lit at all by the light. So we'll need to move it back on Z space in the position. We'll set it to 500 and it's back in its original position. Let's switch to the active camera and see. We need to set it a bit further, let's say 550, and that's better. And now if we'll rotate it, well, actually let's switch back to the custom view and you can see it better. If we'll rotate it on the y-axis, you can see it rotates from this point, and that looks a bit more realistic. We'll start the animation at 4 seconds and 10 frames. We'll set a keyframe for the X and Y, and let's hit U to reveal those keyframes. Now that reveals more than just the keyframes, that reveals also the different expressions that exist by default in the FreeForm Pro plugin. So we'll mark just these 2 keyframes and hit SS to isolate just these keyframes. We'll move 10 frames down the timelines to 4 and 20. We'll make very small movements here. Let's say 4 on the X and 5 on the Y. We'll give it 2 seconds to remain in this position. 10 frames later, we'll make it 5 and let's say -2. And 15 frames later, we'll set 2 more keyframes. Actually, that was 10 frames. We'll give it 15 frames. And 10 frames after that, we'll copy the first frames, so it returns to the original position. Okay, so that's the iris movement. I would like to animate the pupil, same as I did for the iris, and the same gaps as I did for the iris, only not exactly the same. So, to make things easier for me, I'll create a new adjustment layer, Ctrl-Alt-Y, and for this adjustment layer, we'll add markers by hitting the star key, and I'm just marking myself the points where the animation takes place. And now I can cut this adjustment layer, Ctrl-X, and paste it to the depth map layer, Ctrl-V. So these are the points where I need to animate the pupil. Actually, you know what, looking at this, I think we can add the veins a bit more opacity so we can see them a bit better. Let's say 75. And for this one, we'll give it 35, and we can feather it out a bit. Let's add a fast blur here, and we'll make it 5, maybe even 10. And let's see how that looks. Okay, there's our veins. We can really see those now. Maybe it's a bit too much actually, so we'll set it to 45. Maybe this one can be a bit less, let's say 25. Okay, great. Okay, so that's it for the veins. Just a small pause there. Back to the pupil. Let's create a keyframe for the scale here. And we'll move on to the next marker. At this point, we'll set it to 120. Move on to the next marker, create another keyframe. So for 2 seconds, it keeps its scale. And then we want it to scale up again to 135. Keep it at 135 over here as well. And then scale back to 100. We need to do the same animation for the color map, since we have the pupil here as well. We need both pupils to grow and shrink at the same time. And we can copy the keyframes, but a much easier way would be to connect those with an expression. So let's hit S, alt click on the stopwatch, select the pick whip, and select the scale. So now, let's bring this one back here. The color map pupil gets its animation from the iris depth map pupil. Very, very sweet. Let's see how that looks. The pupil animation works very nice, and everything is fine with the animation other than the fact that it's a bit too rough. You know, we need to ease those keyframes. So we'll mark all of the keyframes in the iris layer. Right click and keyframe assistant, easy ease, or you can hit F9 on the keyboard. And let's move into the graph editor and zoom in here a bit. We'll mark those 2 layers, we'll click hold on those tangents and shift and right drag to make it a bit more smooth. Same goes for these keyframes, only this time we'll drag it to the left. So we get a very smooth motion going on here. Same goes for these, smooth out, smooth in, and these smooth out, as well as these, smooth in, smooth out. And we'll need to do the same for these keyframes for the scale. Again, we'll mark all of the keyframes, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease or F9 on the keyboard. We'll switch to the graph editor and we'll smooth those keyframes out. You can use the default easy ease that After Effects provides, but I find that making those curves a bit more extreme really goes a long way. Let's run another quick preview and see how that affected our animation. So we get a lot smoother movements here. We get rapid eye movement, but you can really see the ease in and ease out in motion here. And I think we get a very nice result here. I'm very happy with this. Now, when the eye moves and shrinking and expanding the pupil, we do have some more influence on the rest of the iris. And to simulate that, we'll need to go back to our depth map. Let's add another adjustment layer, Ctrl-Alt-Y, and we'll set it beneath the pupil. We want it to affect everything in this layer other than the pupil. To this layer, we'll add a Liquify effect. Here's what we're going to do. First, we'll rename this layer to Liquify so we'll know what's what. We'll select the expansion tool and we'll increase the brush size. By holding Control and dragging to the left or to the right, you can change the brush size. So this looks about right. We'll leave it exactly in the middle and click on it a few times. Okay, so as you can see, we get a nice effect here. Let's hide the Liquify for a second there. We'll take a snapshot and we'll bring back the Liquify and see how that affects our layer. And as you can see, we get a very distinct effect here. Now, actually, this doesn't yield the effect I was after, and that's because it's affecting the convex. I'll set the Liquify layer beneath the convex, and now that's not affecting the convex. As you can see, we get a squashing effect, and that's exactly what I was after. When the pupil is expanding, I would like to get that squashing effect on the rest of the iris. So let's see, where is the pupil? There it is. We'll hit U to reveal its keyframes. And we'll need to animate the Liquify. 100% is a bit too much, as you've seen there. We'll set it to 80, and let's see how that looks. We'll say that 80 is the max amount of distortion we want to get here. So I'll set the distortion percentage to 0 at this point and create a keyframe for it. Let's hit U to see what's going on. Here the pupil grows by 20% and I'll set the distortion amount to 50. We want to keep this value up to here, and when the pupil grows to 135, we'll set it to 80. At this point, it would keep its value, and at this point, it would shrink back to 0. Let's mark those keyframes. We'll need to easy ease those. Ease out and ease in and ease out. You don't want to overdo it. However, you don't want to leave it at the default. Wonderful. Now we need to apply this same effect to the color. Copy the Liquify layer. Control V, and again make sure it's beneath the pupil. Again, I can use these keyframes, but I rather do this with an expression. So if I'll change the value of those keyframes or their location, I won't have to do it twice. I'll click on the stopwatch and we'll select the pick whip, drag it to the distortion percentage here, and voila. We have the same animation going on in the color map. Now, one last thing before we can say it's done. Let's get closer here. I would like to have just a little bit of an offset between the pupil expanding and shrinking and the entire iris wrinkling and unwrinkling. I would like to have a bit of a delay for the rest of the iris. We'll give it 5 frames more. Run another preview and see how that looks. So the offset here might be a bit too much. Let's make it, instead of 5 frames, we'll make it 2 frames. At this point it works really nice, that offset, only at the very last point it really doesn't look good. So I'll cancel that offset at the last point, and I think that would take care of that. Okay, we still get some offset there. Let's see what's going on here. Let's mark the scale of the pupil and the distortion percentage of the Liquify and switch on the graph editor. And let's focus on these here and see what's going on. Okay, so we've got a lot more of an easy ease here than we do have here. What we need to do is make them as close to each other as possible, and that should do the trick. Okay, this looks a lot nicer. Let's go back to the start of our animation. At this point, where we're really close, I would like actually this edge of the pupil to be a bit more sharp than it is at the moment. So let's again go to the depth map. Let's go to the pupil and we'll hit F to reveal the mask feather. At the moment it's set to 20, and we'll create a keyframe for it. Hit F9 or right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. At the start of our animation we'll make it maybe 10. So we get a nice sharp edge here. And as the camera zooms out, we get a more rounded edge. Other than that, we got 2 blurs, which I would like to take care of at these exact points. From this point forward, I would like the factor 4 blur to be 8. And the general blur here to be 5. Let's hit U to reveal those keyframes. And we'll mark them both, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease or F9 on the keyboard. And at the beginning of our comp, I would like it to be half that amount. So 4 for the factor 4, and let's say even 2 for the fast blur. And that means that at this point, everything is a bit more sharp. I think that's just about it for the iris and pupil. Next, I would like to create the sclera, which is again the surface that's holding the reflection, and in real life it's holding the eye fluid and protects the iris and pupil and so on and so forth. For that, I would need to create another layer with a FreeForm Pro effect. Other than that, I would also apply a depth of field effect, and combining those 3 effects together, things will get a bit heavy on the machine. So at this point, I would think what I would do is render out the iris, let's say up to this point, as an EXR sequence. And once it's rendered, I'll import that sequence back, and above it, I'll create the sclera layer. You can use a TIFF or a PNG or any sort of file format you like, as long as it has an alpha channel. Remember, we have this area here, which is an alpha channel. I'll render out this image sequence and we'll continue on from that point. Okay, so it rendered out pretty fast. And there's my sequence. I've hid the original iris layer, and there's my iris. Time to add the sclera. We'll create a new layer, Control Y, and we'll make it 720 by 720. Make sure its color is neutral gray, 125 by 125 by 125 for the red, green, and blue channels. Hit OK, and we'll pre-compose it, Control-Shift-C. And we'll make sure we move all attributes into the new composition. And we'll call this composition sclera color map. Double click on it. We need to apply a circle mask to it. So double click on the ellipse tool, which will create a perfect ellipse there. And we can close now this composition. And we'll place this one above the rendered iris sequence. To the sclera color map, which we can rename to just sclera, we'll apply the FreeForm Pro, or FreeForm, depends on what you're using. We'll set the sclera transfer mode to add, so now we can see a bit better what's going on. We'll set its scale to be a bit larger than the iris, so we'll set it to 125 on all axes. Now I would like it to have the same animation as the iris, but in order for it to move in the same way that the iris moves, we need to again change its anchor point in space to 500 and move it back on Z space in the position to 500. Now we moved the iris to 550, only this time it's not enough since we changed its scale. So we'll move it in space back to 650, and that should do the trick. Now I would like it to rotate same as the iris rotates on the X and Y. Let's hit U to reveal those keyframes and delete those, and hit SS. I only created those keyframes to reveal those two properties, and we'll hit U for the iris to reveal the rotation X and Y keyframes. Now alt click on the rotation X of the sclera and pick whip it to the rotation X of the iris. Same goes for the Y, and now the sclera should move the same as the iris, and it does. Now the whole point of the sclera is to hold the reflection, and we can apply the reflection straight on the color map, but I would actually like to apply it as a map to the reflection mapping. Before we do that, however, I would like to create a depth map for the sclera. We'll move the sclera color map to the maps folder, duplicate it, and we'll rename this one to depth map. Let's open that up and let's see. I would like to create here a nice ramp inside the sphere where the edges are darker than the center. So I'll duplicate this layer and I'll change this one to something close to black, maybe just a dark gray, something of this sort. I'll switch their order, so the light one is above the dark one. Let's hit MM, and that reveals all the mask properties. We'll feather it out a bunch and set the mask expansion a bit lower. Something of this sort. Now I know I get these edges that's going above where they should be in space, and there's an easy way of dealing with that. We'll duplicate the bottom gray solid and place it above everything. We'll set the lighter layer to alpha mate, so this layer acts as a mate. So this will be the depth map, and let's drag it in here and shut down the eye for it. And we'll go to the effect and we'll go to displacement mapping and we'll set the sclera depth map as the depth mapping. And we'll displace it by, let's say, 100, maybe 150. Next, we want to create the reflection map. So we'll create a new composition, Control N, and we'll call this one reflection map. In my assets folder under stills, I have two images, an HDR image in an EXR format, and the other is a reflection map, which is another HDR image, which I converted into a PNG. And frankly, I can't tell you where I got them from because I honestly don't remember. But All you need to do is Google HDR images or reflection maps, and you'll find tons of these. I would like to set the top one, the reflection map, transfer mode to add, and I'll set its opacity to 10. Other than that, I would like to blur this image, so I'll add a fast blur, and I'll blur it by 5. And I would also like to blur the bottom image. I don't want my reflection to be extremely sharp, so we'll set it to 10. And I would also like to add some color correction. So I'll create a new adjustment layer, Ctrl-Alt-Y. We'll rename this one to CC, which stands for color correction, and we'll add curves to it. Now let's switch to the red channel and take out some of the red. We'll take out some of the green as well, and we'll increase the blue. And that's all a bit too much, so maybe take it down a notch. This should be fine. I would also like to add some amount of movement in the reflection map. So to the second image, I'll add a turbulence displacement. I'll leave everything in the default stage. I only want to animate the evolution. So we'd get this sort of weird movement going on. So easiest way of animating the evolution is to add in a time expression. Alt-click on the evolution, and we'll write time times 20. And now I've got an automated evolution going on. Let's close the reflection map. We'll drag it in our composition, and we don't really need to see it, so we'll shut down the eye for it. Moving back to the sclera layer, we'll go to our effect, and under reflection mapping, we'll set reflection layer from none to reflection map. And there's our reflection map. Very, very sweet. I would like my entire animation to last for 11 seconds. So let's hit Ctrl K to reveal the composition settings, and we'll set the duration to 11.01. My iris sequence render ends at this point. That's not what we're after. Let's hit Ctrl-Alt-T to enable the time remapping and stretch it to fit. So now we still get the animation, only from this point on we still get 1 more second of still frame of the iris sequence, only the sclera still animates this 1 last second. Next I would like to add that stars we had in the background, just to fill up that black void, and once we'll add the depth of field, it would really add to the final look and feel of this whole composition. So let's create a new layer, Ctrl-Y, and we'll make sure it's comp size, make comp size. To fill that, I used trapcode particulars star field preset. So just type in star field, and there it is, star field static 1 and 2. I think I used 1. Let's isolate it for a second. And there it is, star field 1. Okay, let's see, where's the keyframes here? Just drag it back in time, and there it is, static. Wonderful. Of course, we need to set it beneath the iris sequence. Okay, so the time has come to add our depth of field. There are several ways you can add depth of field to this composition. You can use the After Effects native camera's depth of field, which is pretty nice. You can use camera lens blur, which is native to After Effects, so you can find it under blur and sharpen, camera lens blur. You need to apply a new layer or a new adjustment layer, apply the camera lens blur, and there you can add the blur map, and it's working fine. Maybe a bit heavy on the system, but all in all, it's a very nice effect. However, I would like to use a different kind of a plugin called Depth of Field, FL Depth of Field, by Frischluft. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I'm probably butchering his name, but anyway, this particular plugin, actually all of his other plugins are amazing. The amount of accuracy and fast performance you get from this plugin is amazing. I highly recommend it. To use it, we need again to use a depth of field map. Rename this layer to depth of field and we'll place it above our sclera. We'll need to create a depth of field layer. So Control Y and we'll create a new solid and we'll apply ramp to it. We'll change the ramp shape from linear to radial. I'll apply a levels effect here and I want to change the gamma closer to the black. And I'll also add a fast blur just to fade it out a bit and make sure that we repeat edge pixel. So we get a nice transition from black to white. Okay, so this is our depth of field map and we need to pre-compose it. Control-Shift-C. We'll call it depth of field map as well. Move all attributes. Okay. And we don't really need to see it. Place it in the bottom. Great. We'll go back to our depth of field map, the FL depth of field plugin. In the depth layer, we'll change none to depth of field map. And we'll set the radius to 4. And there you can see we get a very nice depth of field going on. Now, the sclera should start appearing from about 6 seconds. Let's make it 6 seconds and 10 frames. We'll hit T, create a keyframe for the opacity and set it to 0. We'll give it 1 second and 10 frames more. And there it should appear. So that's its animation. At the start of our composition, we shouldn't see so much of a depth of field. At this point, I would like the depth of field to be at a radius of 4, and we'll set a keyframe for it. Hit U to reveal the keyframes, and hit F9 to make it an easy ease, or right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. And at 2 seconds, I'll make it 2, so it won't be as harsh. However, now that the depth of field is not so harsh, I do get a very sharp edge here, which you don't see here. Over here, because of the depth of field, the edge is very, very smooth, and I would like to have the same effect going on here. So, I'll add to the iris sequence an edge blur. And that takes care of the edges. And I'll set the blur amount, let's see, from 2 seconds. At this point, I'll set it to 0. Mark those 2 keyframes, hit F9 to make them easy ease, or right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. Well, good folks, this is how I created the eye close-up, or the eye observing space. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Once again, my name is Ram Ben Avraham, and I'll see you next time.